Can anyone hear sound? I hear no one. Is the sound on?
I can hear you. This is Brett. Do you copy me?
I'm sorry, I don't hear anything from the room. Is noise going on? Any sound?
Not that I'm picking up.
Oh, okay. It's not, excuse me, it's not just me. Okay. There's no way to send a chat to ask if there's an issue. I don't know.
There is here. You can.
I'm looking at the bottom. I've got whiteboard and maybe apps.
Okay.
Usually there's like a little icon that says chat.
Yeah.
No, it just says loading my apps. That's
Hey, Brent and Catherine, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
This is Isaac Stats. I'm staff with the committee here. I am in communication with the members there. It sounds like we're having some technical issues with the sound.
Yeah.
We are working on getting that taken care of right now.
Okay, so I don't need to exit the meeting and come back in or anything.
No, we're just trying to get the big mute button to work correctly.
Okay, I will mute myself and hope for the best. I'll grab my coffee and I'll be right back.
Okay.
Thanks, Isaac.
Yep, not a problem.
Brett, can you hear me?
I sure can.
Okay, well, I guess we only can hear each other still. Okay. I have a really bad cold, which is why I'm not there.
Got it.
Yeah, so I'm just going to be real quiet. But just want to make sure nothing.
Sorry to hear that.
It's okay. Anyway, I guess we'll start hearing when we start hearing.
I think that's the way these things go.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to mute.
Okay.
Okay, can we do a sound check?
Check, testing.
Can you guys hear us okay
Can you
remotely?
hear us, Brett? Kathy?
Good morning.
Yes. Yay. Finally. Thank you.
Well done. Group 3. That's it.
Yeah. So either one. Yeah, okay. Isn't Sue Harris? Catherine Austin?
Oh, no, Morgan.
Oh, Morgan.
Sorry,
Yeah, it's just Morgan, but
Morgan is
Jeff's
on the
texting her.
cities.
She's not even in.
It's not allowed to.
The city's calendar page.
Yeah, or on the website. She's needs to get to the agenda.
Okay. All right. All right, we're getting one more committee member hooked up with the panelist designation online. So I'll go ahead and start and we'll finish with the online, hopefully all 3 online. I'm Jeff Harris with Solar Home Builders on the committee, and I have a potential conflict as a local home builder.
Ron Johnson, no conflict.
Eric Huffman, potential conflict.
Corey Bittner, Polish, potential conflict.
Gina Franzosa, potential conflict.
Kirby Choksey, Environment Committee.
Jim Roberts, no conflict.
Sue Gordon Hammer, Plan Commission, no conflicts.
Ian Jenkins, I'm landscape architect with Sarah Architects, potential.
And then online, let's go to Kathy.
Yes. Kathy Austin. No conflict.
And Brett.
Brett Ewitz, potential conflict.
And let's see, do we have Morgan yet?
Not yet.
We'll
Oh,
see-
yes, she's an attendee.
So you're promoting your.
Okay.
Everyone congratulate Morgan on her promotion. Welcome, Morgan. We're doing the introduction and roll call and declaration of potential or actual conflicts.
Yes, sir. Morgan Greenwood, Central Oregon Builders Association, potential conflict.
All right, thank you, everybody. We have an agenda to pull up, and we'll go through that. Reminder about the emergency test at 11:20. I'll have an alarm go off and we'll deal with that.
Give me 1 second. My team's still not open.
Okay.
That's weird. Yeah, see, I'm gonna keep getting this.
That's bizarre.
If you hit the assistant tray here. Right click on the Teams. Right click.
Sign out.
Or you can do my status, could be. Start. Oh, did you say you already had that?
I think I have just red with this, email, red with a slash.
Got it.
So that should do
Oh,
it.
maybe. It'll mute it.
Well, that was challenging.
Phew.
Anyone else like to have a technology opportunity? It's all the
Too much
rage.
technology.
Okay, so we've hit 1 and 2 already. Good job. 16 minutes. So I'm going to hand it over to Councilor Perkins here to help summarize, and then Christy and Pauline and I can give color commentary if appropriate,
great.
but take
I
it
love color
away.
commentary.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think just first of all, that just to talk a little bit about the scope for a second, I think that we all appreciate really deeply all the discussions and ideas and work that you've had for this broad subject. And I think we all really look forward to seeing that parking lot or bike rack or tree farm or whatever we're going to call it of options and ideas that are outside of the scope, but would just really like to encourage that first, particularly for these next couple of meetings, that we really focus on these items in the scope. Because I think, we council would really like to see your recommendations in the upcoming months. The work session, I could say that we all felt like, everything was going in the right direction. Everyone is so appreciative of all the work you've been doing, the discussions you've been having, and the balance that you've been addressing as you've gone through this process. I think that the key phrase or the key word that I would get out of the work session is flexibility, and that we really, all agree that that's the best direction to go into. Really, we originally in the scope, we talked about the Southeast area plan, but really wanting to sort of broaden that to get that flexibility. And I think that it really comes down to almost like a flow chart, and we were all in agreement with this. You do the preserve the big trees, the old trees, then the small trees, then the replacement on site, and then the mitigation. Council was really interested in also seeing if there could be like a mix on site. You could do a little bit of this and a little bit of that, but that was really sort of the process that they that we all would like to, and I think that you're all going in as well on the committee, and just really making sure that there is some form of incentive to and that we don't make it too easy to just clear cut a site. So with replacement ratios and the like. The one area that was that we couldn't really come to consensus on and wanted to sort of kick back to you is this idea of if there's any sort of floor, if there's, and again, to avoid clear cutting, but also making sure that we're not causing any, our housing goals to be impacted at all. But wanted to kick that back to you to have that discussion moving forward. And if there comes a time when you're stuck between 2 or 3 options, we said, please feel free to, come back to us in a work session and we can talk those through again. Am I forgetting anything from the work session for those who were there? And thank you for being at that work session. It was a good discussion, I think.
I think so.
Anything else that?
Certainly gets to it. If we think of something else, we'll toss it in throughout today. Thank you.
Yes.
So I think the next step really is let's go through the preservation options that we've been discussing and that Pauline has continued to work toward something that makes sense to us that we can really evaluate so that we're able to hopefully get to a couple of to speak to the flow chart idea of the preserve larger trees if you can, preserve smaller trees if you can't, then replace on site, and making sure that those are sensible so that the priority order matches the order of the flow chart. Because that's definitely the feedback that we've gotten. And I think the consensus we've started to build here is that let's make these options available, but not so that there's all that we accidentally default to a too hard or a too easy option.
Yep, so just a reminder, the one recommendation so far Truac has come with is proposing is what we're calling regulated trees, which is 6 inches or larger, and that is every type of tree. And then priority trees is the 20 inches or larger. And when we did make this recommendation, it was under with the understanding that this could change, you know, depending on what we come up with for the actual preservation standards. But it's been since August. I thought I'd remind us what we talked about. So we put together just kind of a tree preservation flow chart, and it highlights what Megan was talking about from the council's direction. First, with the first step when an application comes in, what we're going to be looking at and talking about today is preserving priority trees. And what is that percentage? 20, 25, or 30%. And if an applicant can preserve that required number, then they would be done. If they are unable to preserve the amount of priority trees, then they would move on to looking at possibly preserving either overall DBH or a certain number of trees on site, but it includes the smaller trees ranging from the 6 inches or larger. And it can also include the priority trees of 20 inches or larger. And we'll talk about that preservation percentage today as well. And if an applicant is able to comply with those requirements, then they're done and they move on. If they're not able to comply with those requirements or not completely, maybe they can't preserve some of them, but not all of them, then they move on into the mitigation. And when I say mitigation, that's what we're talking about is the tree replacement on site. And we may get to that today, I'm doubtful, but if not, the next meeting, we'll talk about the tree replacement. That's at 1-to-1, 2-to-1 on site mitigation, or they can pay a fee in lieu. But from council's direction, we'd like to see the replanting on site first, if possible, then get to the fee. And as Megan said too, let's say they just can't do any of this. Is there an interest in having a floor? And that recommendation can go to council, and it would be a low floor so that we don't get sites that are just clear cut. And as I mentioned too, you can combine any of these. Once you get to preserving some of the trees, it could be preserving some of the trees 6 inches or larger along with mitigation. So a combination of the last 3 steps is possible. It's kind of how staff is looking at this, and based on our conversation today could be the recommendation. So I tried to break out the charts just a little bit simpler.
I think, does Morgan have her hand up or is that from before?
I don't see.
Down at the bottom, it's not showing on yours.
Morgan does have her hand
Oh,
up.
okay.
Morgan's now a good break for you to ask your question while we got the flow chart up.
Thank you. Yeah, pardon. I just want to kind of focus in on what that denominator is. Is this going to have a certain percentage that is remaining after city standards have been met, specifically right-of-way and engineering requirements for utilities?
So if I understand correctly, so if an application comes in for, let's say, a land division, we will look at the site and look at the entire site, the number of trees on it, and they would start off looking at the priority trees 20 inches or greater. If they can't meet that, then they would just go down this step in the flow chart.
Yeah, and Morgan, trees removed for right-of-way dedication and construction or utilities would count as trees removed in this numerator denominator.
That's not consistent with the Southeast area plan, though, right? the southeast area plan excludes right-of-way trees that are removed.
I'll have to double check.
Hmm.
that.
Yeah,
Okay,
Yeah, we don't.
yeah, there
I'm
is
planning-
exemptions in the southeast area plan for
okay.
if minimum density can't be made, public facilities, right away, arterial streets. So, yeah, that was, yes, good question. How do those factor in? Are those pulled in before or after?
Outside of southeast area, it's all
trees.
trees.
Okay,
So I guess that could be a point that we discuss at some point, yeah.
And to talk about the southeast area plan, remember that the threshold there to preserve trees is a lot higher than what we're talking about.
It's 50.
Yeah, it's 50%
Right.
and 24 inches or greater, not 20.
Thanks, Pauline. I just want to make that recommendation that trees removed for city standards are the preservation requirement percentage.
So you would take out any the trees, so you identify where the streets are and all the utilities, and then those trees don't count.
Right.
I think that's worth a vote at some
Yeah.
point.
You need to-
Discussion
needing
and
to
vote.
move entire streets for a tree. So there's a lot of reasons why streets need to be in the places that they are. So, yeah.
Catherine is also raised her hand. But
Hi, thank you. I think that was a really good question and I hadn't thought about it. So thank you, Morgan. And I guess Pauline made the point that the percentage of trees saved is higher, like 50%. So maybe the discussion is, okay, if you're subtracting out that area for the roads, maybe the percentage saved goes up or something, because right now it's a range of 20 to 30%. So I understand the concern and it makes total sense. I'm just wondering what's the best way to approach it. And just suggesting that maybe if we do deduct that we consider the higher end of like 30% as opposed to 20%. So that's all. Thank you.
I'd like to clarify something. I mean, those of you who do development, like so on the Simpson property, we don't count the streets that are in the right of way or even the newly dedicated right of way. And we can cut down trees in the right of way indiscriminately. We're only counting trees on site right now in the current City of Bend development process.
On the
Right.
property.
Right. Okay. So I think,
But newly created streets, so the example that we started off with, what is that, 27?
Sky Vista.
Sky Vista,
Mhm.
that was just a large piece of property without any right of way, and they put new streets in, and where the new streets are going, there are trees that are.
Those count in the denominator, but the frontage along 27th, if it had to be dedicated.
Yep.
In that case, it already existed, but like, if
Right.
you had to dedicate frontage, or if it's a corner parcel, and you have to dedicate that to an existing street as part of development, that would not count in the denominator in today's world.
so when
Right.
we do development in Bend, back me up here. As developers, we don't get to dictate saving trees in even newly created right of way. That comes through the development review process, and the engineering department will tell us 9 times out of 10, cut that tree down and we want to see this here. So it's not up to us.
Mhm.
So I want to save trees, but I'm just saying no one should be feeling like we're actually gonna be able to do that in the right of way. So if we say we want to save 50% of trees, then that ends up being only on the development land. Like you can almost be assured that all trees in the right of way are going to get cut down. That's what happens. So,
Which is probably a good note we have that as as one of the largest recommendations we have that's outside of our scope.
right.
And so that combined with we're going to come back in 12 or 18 months with actual data on applications processed so that we can process and update to the code. This might be one of those things where we get something inked so that we can have something to test, but not have it be too high of a threshold so that we potentially restrict small developments by one-off small developers. It's easy to think about the single lot or the large subdivision that's Polish or Hayden or Woodhill, but the reality is that the HB 2001 stuff is unlocking the 1.4 acre parcel with the small developer who's going to do 7 units that we need. And the math for that is there's a fraction of the 7th unit is the profit that they take from it. And they don't take it until they've entitled, permitted, built, sold and closed the 7th unit, which the meter is running the whole time. It's not crying the blues. It's just a detail that I'd like the group to think about, because it's easy to think about a large rectangle with a lot of trees or no trees, and easy to think about the lot next door to you that had trees cut down. And the reality is most of the work inside the UGB is happening on these small and medium sized properties. Sorry to detour there. I think Christie.
Yeah, I was gonna say another way this would be different than the southeast area plan is that one is just 24 and over. So if that was in a right of way, you had to cut it, you'd immediately have to mitigate, where this is saying, so say you have to cut that one in the right of way, you can pick other trees elsewhere that aren't as large or whatnot. So you don't necessarily have to mitigate taking the right of way trees, but it sounds like there's still some concerns about that those numbers being too high, but just to point out that that doesn't necessarily mean there's a fee being paid or mitigation required. There's other options on site.
Well, it's complicated, right? Because I think that's the point of council asking us to do this, is that in the past, it was the engineer would go in and say, well, this is the easiest place to put the roads in. And so we're going to put the roads right here, and we're going to just, we're going to discredit all those trees. I think the point of what council's asking us is, well, maybe it's not the easiest, but we need to move the road over a little bit because this is a significant tree, right? But we also have to balance that with what does that cost, right? And how does it impact housing? So it's not super simple. It's complicated.
Because there's almost always a connecting street, and you just can't do this.
Right.
Or we've all been in those intersections where it happens.
Right.
It's like it doesn't work.
Yep.
So we know why it's this way, but that's why we're talking about the right of way widths and some of the other challenges that we have there and the other standards outside of this code. Right. Covey?
Yeah, just to make sure I have a good understanding of this. So the Southeast area plan does exclude right of way, but it has a higher percentage of 50%. And then some of the cities we are modeling these percentages after are lower, but do not exclude right of way. Is that
Right?
Good understanding. So if we're trying to exclude right of way, should we be considering a higher percentage as well, like the Southeast area plan?
Does the Southeast area plan also exclude the new rights of way, not just the edge dedication?
Renee's pulling it up right now.
Right.
So it excludes all streets.
All
Yeah.
streets, okay, so that's the difference. So if this helps a little bit, so in the Southeast area plan, if it's a square and it has a new street in it, that area is also excluded from the calculation. In the rest of the city right now, the new streets would not be excluded. That would be in the denominator. It would be the perimeter. If you're building on, Poplar's an example where it's sort of at a corner, but one's private and one's public. So there's a right of way dedication where the road's unimproved. The right of way is unimproved on the frontage of an existing road. So that has to be done. There's no question about it. Those trees don't count in the city, but other trees on the property would. If the property's split by a new road, as part of the application, those trees would count in the denominator in the rest of the city. That clear is.
So we're doing kind of a mix of Southeast area plan and updating the whole city code too, but not fully following that either.
Right. Or the proposal by Morgan is that the right of way dedication would be more like the Southeast area plan. So then our discussion would be around the percentage that goes along with that.
And it seems there's a preference from developers it makes sense to exclude right away because that's not in their control. But I guess my question is then the range we're looking at, should we increase it on the higher end to, if the Southeast area plan has 50%, my question would be, what would we be considering something that high as well then?
Yeah, so that'll be a healthy discussion when we get to that spot here shortly. Because the difference there is it's the 24-inch trees versus we have a whole range of 6 to 23 and at 0.9. That is part of our mix. It's not currently in the Southeast area plan. So there's a little more to it than just right of way or not, but
And just to
This is
clarify,
four-dimensional chess.
in the southeast area plan, trees removed within existing or proposed, it's arterials and collectors only are exempt from the count. So local roads
So local street would-
are in the
would be
mix.
counted.
Yeah.
That's-
And that's how the southeast area plan is. So if you have shown arterial or collector on the TSP map, then those would be exempted, and then any existing right of way.
I had one more quick question.
Yeah, go ahead,
and then
Dan.
I'm gonna move forward. This is more procedural. So there's a threshold in this flow chart between preserve and mitigate. And how does that threshold, work? Because at some point, someone has to say, gee, we can't preserve, so we're gonna mitigate. Is that a city approval process? So it goes through a site plan review. Someone looks at it and says, yes, you have the approval to mitigate to whoever is developing the property. So that is a controlled process where they look and they say, gee, all the site design options, you can't preserve the trees, so we will allow or permit mitigation.
And it's just gonna be clear and objective options. So the big trees, we're gonna hopefully get to a much lower percentage to
Okay.
encourage that.
Yeah,
A developer has that option. If they don't want that option, then the next option that they can do is a higher percentage, but an overall
right.
DVH. And if they still don't want to, and they're not gonna have to show us why they can or can't,
Yeah.
because that's clear and objective. It's just, can you meet this? No. Do you wanna meet this?
Yeah,
No. Then they can do a combination.
right.
And then the idea is if we did do a floor, if they get all the way down of getting to
Right.
know, a floor would maybe at 5% saying, can you at least give us 5%
Yeah,
of trees?
okay. Because oftentimes the language is, well, the developer will just mitigate, and that's not. It
And
really,
they
that,
may.
that process needs to go through clear and objective standards and have approval by the city. Okay,
Yeah, like Pauline's saying, it needs to be objective, so we wouldn't be able to use any discretion in saying, oh, I believe that the developer explored all other options. We would just
Okay.
need to accept what was presented, but our goal is that the code is written in a way and it incentivizes the
Yeah.
things we want to incentivize so that objectively we get to a somewhat similar outcome.
And after I'm just gonna say a year, but whatever the number is that we recommend for the review, then staff will be able to build an actual spreadsheet evaluating every application that comes through that is subject to this, so that our successors will have good information to be able to say, okay, this didn't work. And there will be some anecdotal stuff there too. That'll be the less clear and objective, the subjective of, well, evaluating these options isn't as simple as some embedded if-then statements in a spreadsheet, right? Because it's the location of them, not just the size. So how do we hear that feedback from various applicants? And that's what the elected officials get to decide at that point. Congratulations.
So starting to talk about what is that percentage for the 20 inches or larger trees that we want to preserve. And then the next two slides is, so I broke these out a little bit. So instead of combining them, because I thought that got a little busy, and since we're doing kind of a flow chart, first we would say, what is this percentage? Then the next two slides will talk about what is the regulated percentage. So this is basically the same thing we looked at in August for trees that are 20 inches or larger, showing different projects ranging from just your regular subdivision of Sky Vista to some mixed use. We have some apartment complexes to master plans on here, and what projects were able to preserve under what percentage of the 20 inches or larger trees. So the ones in green show you that the multi-use project, the Viridian, the two master plans and the two apartment complexes were able to meet the 20% requirements. They were also almost all four of them very close to meeting the 25%. And then if you get up to 30%, there was 3 that could definitely meet it and 1 more if they just saved another tree. So they're very close. And this is, we haven't even talked about if we're rounding up or rounding down. But if we round it down, then I think that they'd be fine. So the discussion here and a recommendation that we're looking for is what percent of the priority trees do we want to recommend? And then I'll show you what I did for the next two. this one should look familiar. So the priority trees, we are looking at a number of trees to preserve. When we talk about the overall canopy, we're talking about the DBH, or overall all the trees, 6 inches or greater, we're talking about the DBH to be preserved. And in the green, it shows you a little bit of variety, so that the poplar cottages could meet almost all the way up the 20, 25, and 30% of the DBH. One of the master plans was able to, as well as the 2 apartment complexes. So with this one, we'd be looking at a recommendation on the percentage. And then another idea, which whether or not, there's pros and cons, I think, to each, but I was thinking, since we're looking at the 20 inches or greater on the number of trees, would it simplify it to also then say a number of trees? If they can't do that one, then instead of looking at overall DBH, they would look at a number of all the trees. The outcome is very similar, as you can see, with the green for the projects can meet 20, 25, and 30%. And I'm sure there's some pros and cons to looking at overall DBH or looking at the number of trees. So,
But it sort of begs the question, if we're looking for flexibility and simplicity,
Right.
you know, does a simple count?
Is it simpler?
Yeah.
Is it actually simpler?
but I was just gonna say, one thing that we did talk about when we put this together is that if you went with overall DBH, that could still encourage a developer to save some of the larger trees because they can get to that calculation faster. So that one would probably more likely meet council's goal of preserving larger trees versus just counting trees.
I was actually gonna make the same point.
Yeah.
Just that if there's 19-inch trees versus 5-inch trees.
Yes.
It helps a lot.
Karen?
Yeah, I have a question. Looking at the Bree multi-unit and the Bulletin multi-unit, I was talking to someone last week who said, oh, you know, grading is a real problem. Has anyone looked at those 2 units? How were they able, like, to save all 5 of their 20 inches, or 5 out of the 6 of their 20 inches? What did they do
So
to be able to do that?
The bulletin has some significant grades at the closer to the intersection. So I'm not an engineer, but they left that alone and they built the apartments next to them. So they were fortunate in this case, they were able to preserve a lot of the trees.
That's
and
impressive.
The whole, the lower area of the site and some of the perimeter trees too, if I remember correctly. And then the Bree multi-unit, I think it's encumbered by an easement on, I want to say, the west side of the property, which happened to have a lot of trees because the rest site was already graded from previous uses. So they were able to meet their requirements there as well. So, and every site is just so unique that it's hard to.
Is it fair to, well, there's a pattern. I don't know if there's a pattern that would be interesting to see. Is it harder to meet this tree code with single unit versus multi-unit?
Well,
And I mean, it adds another complexity, which I'm not sure we want to address here, but there are different development types. Where you have larger footprints on the multi-unit, which may give you more flexibility than a bunch of small footprints on a single unit with more grading, because everybody wants their lot flat, so.
Yeah, it really comes down to the property, like you said, it totally comes down to the property and what you're trying to do on that property. So it could
For
be
a long time, there were RM pieces in Bend just being built with single family detached, but you know, the range of density there wants to push toward townhouses, but the market doesn't necessarily, we don't make the market, we just serve the market and try to meet the demand that's there. So there aren't that many townhouse developments in Bend, right? Which was perfect for a certain RM site. Think about the one on Broster House, you know, that got developed finally, but it was a hard site and it needed values to get to a spot before it made sense. So,
and if you look at the mixed use, I mean, they took all the trees out and that's it. And there was significant topography there, some right of way issues. And then if you look at Viridian, they weren't able to save all of them either because a lot of their larger trees were interior to the site, similar to poplar. So it just depends
Yeah,
on the
it's,
site.
Yeah. And Poplar at a half an acre just happens to have a rock outcropping on the one edge where there happens to be some decent trees. So like it meets it, it was done carefully. But it's still, it's a small site. And if you didn't have all 7 units on less than 2/3 of the property, then it doesn't happen.
But that's a really good example because Poplar, their large trees were in the developable area. So they were only save 1, but then if you go to the DVH, they would probably opt to do the DVH of 20, 25, or even 30% because they were able to save overall DVH, just not all the large trees because they were in the wrong spot.
So how did Poplar do on the large trees then?
Not very good.
Oh, I see.
And they really were just in the wrong spot.
Oh,
Karen,
Karen,
sorry.
yes, thank you.
Oh,
Karen,
not to be a devil's advocate, but I looked at 6 subdivisions, including, so I start with the one of Polish on Reed Market in 15. They did 51 single detached units and the rest were attached or townhouses. And I look at those 6 subdivisions and I calculated, what if you eliminated the single family detached and required everything to either be attached or townhouses? And on every one of those, you saved a significant amount of land that could have been dedicated for trees. Because you've got like the detached houses, what, 6 feet between them, which is total waste space. The sun can't even get in there. And if you required only attached or townhouses, there'd be a lot more room for trees if you did not allow single family detached.
Yeah,
I think
Karen,
that's the biggest legal challenge that the city would face then was in the history of with HB 2001 where it is and eliminating solely single family designated zoning. I think we would find ourselves in a big, you're not wrong that the math works, but the market and the state legislation makes it pretty, I think, challenging to say we'll force one kind over another.
Yeah, the market will only support, a certain amount of townhomes that people are willing to purchase the townhomes in today's market. And if you were to go in and just make everything a townhome, the project wouldn't perform. You wouldn't be able to do it, which would then prohibit the need for housing. It just, like I said, the numbers work, but the
Politics do not work.
the market won't support it. Yeah, it won't work. You won't get housing.
Covey and then Eric.
Okay, 2 quick questions. Karen's previous point just brought this to mind in terms of what are some of these developments doing well, not so well. Is this something that is already provided or that would be helpful for builders, some kind of best practices for preserving trees that the city could provide or gather from different experts that go in the process of development, from arborists and engineers and architects and designers? I was just thinking of that as something to supplement the code, if that would be helpful for especially smaller builders. I don't know if that would be helpful or if that information is already out there.
You'd have to ask a smaller builder. It wouldn't help. I think developers that are doing it day in, day out are pretty familiar with what kind of has to happen, but maybe for smaller builders.
Okay. And second quick question, maybe that could be added to our.
Yeah, I was just writing it down on the side recommendations notes. Yeah.
And a quick question back to this. So when we're looking at these percentages again, are we looking, what's the status on right of way for that? I'm still not clear.
So if we were to use something similar to the Southeast area plan, and it's today too, if there's existing right of way and they have to improve it and there's trees in it, it's already in the right of way. They don't, those trees don't count. We're only looking at trees on site. The difference between the code today and the Southeast area plan is if there's an identified arterial or collector on our transportation system plan, we could add that as an exemption because they have to put in those roads in accordance with TSP and discount those trees from being saved because you have to follow the transportation system plan and put in the arterials and collectors where they're supposed to go.
So we would be following more Southeast area plan for the full code.
That's a recommendation and discussion for.
But the percentage we're looking at, the Southeast area plan has 50%.
I have one more really dumb question. When we talk about the right of way, what exactly are we talking about?
60.
But I mean, are we talking about, like, say here you have a lot, and you have public roads running, say, this way and that way. Are you talking about just a right of way created by the existing public roads? Or are you talking about the right of way with all of the developments roads are also attached, included?
But I think we're talking about a combination. So if within the development, it's an arterial or a collector that's required by the transportation system plan, then that's in the Southeast Area Plan considered the same as if you're developing a corner lot that currently didn't have sidewalks or didn't have a right-of-way dedication, and you would be forced to do that by the existing public streets of any status, then that would be excluded because you're required to do it. Versus if it's a local street, which is a typical subdivision that ends in a cul-de-sac or connects to
That's a
another
design.
street, then that would be more to the developer's discretion than a required transportation system plan street.
Because I keep coming back to declare and objective standards. If you included every proposed local street, a developer could just design it so that there is no room left for anything. So I think the clear and objective standards have to be very clear and objective.
Agreed.
Yes, right.
Yeah, I'd like to just touch on small properties. I think that Bree project and that Bolton project are misleading in that those trees are preserved because they must have, I'm not familiar with their site plan, but they must have some area that's inaccessible that has a lot of trees in it, so good for them. But I think that a lot of these small 2-acre and smaller projects, you don't have any option where your road's gonna go. There's only one way. And in those, you have no option on saving those trees. So I think that these smaller properties, you gotta relax the standards on those.
So then let's say, Eric, the Bree and Bolton are fortunate they had great locations for their big trees. But let's say they didn't, similar to Poplar, which is a really small property. Then you would go and look at, well, if they don't want to do the preservation of the large priority trees, then the developer has the option of just looking at the overall DVH, and then they can comply with that. Let's say they really can't preserve the overall DVH, they can do a combination, preserve maybe a handful of trees. We're not talking about a large percentage here, even at 30%, it's not very large. And then they can replace on site. So maybe they have a gateway, Polish has a lot of gateways or apartment complexes, and they plant some trees there. And if they can't do that, then they can just pay and live. So they can work through and get down to where they're barely preserving any trees on site, maybe just a couple, because every site is different. And then they can pay. And then we'll talk about the floor, and maybe one of the options for the floor is exempting smaller properties.
But that depends too on whether this is RS or RM or RH property too, what you're trying to put on this, what you need to put on this property.
We have not broken it out into requirements based on zoning. Because, I mean, every zone now, you can put a handful of uses with absolutely no density maximums. You don't have to build single family homes now in the RS. You have a variety of homes that you could be building in the RS. Basically, RS and RM are almost identical.
I kind of wonder if in some ways there may be as much tree preservation gained if open space requirements were just bumped up a little bit. And that was, and we didn't do anything else with this analysis.
Okay, 10%, we're good.
It's really easy code update.
But it's an interesting comment, right? I mean, that was one thing that came up in our last planning commission meeting was the discussion Suzanne brought up, right? Seeing more open space in some of these planned developments. I think it's worth a conversation.
Well, with Corey, let's say, you know, you have a regular subdivision and tree preservation can happen in a lot narrower spots. Usually when we talk about open space, there's a dimensional requirement. So it's truly an open space area. seems like that would maybe be less flexible in some cases versus preserving some trees maybe in your gateway into the development or in the perimeter of the development. That's not truly usable open space, but
Right.
it's.
Yeah, honestly, my brain is spinning around that thought. I mean, just so many scenarios, right?
Right.
Every property is unique, and so I'm not saying that it's a bad idea or maybe a great idea. I don't know. I just have to. My brain's still processing that. Yeah.
I would just say, being a recovering engineer, trees provide a huge ecosystem service to the community. And so you're not guaranteed to save trees if you increase the open space requirements. Sure, you could plant trees in the open space, right? But like I think about the open spaces that we have on our communities, and people like picnic tables and they like other stuff. So I think it is really important to kind of keep in mind that we're asking for trees to be preserved for ecosystem benefit, as well as people like to look at trees, right? Yes, true, but
I mean, generally speaking, even on these small properties, generally we're planting more trees than we are cutting down. I mean, even today when there's projects where you have to clear cut, and at the end of the day, there's usually more trees planted than there are that we're taking down. So I think the path that we're going down is good. And so I don't know, I would encourage us to keep going down the path.
But just to be clear, the way this is being drafted, and then we're gonna go to public comment, is that there are trees that are required that Corey's referring to, like your street trees, and that does add up pretty quick. Those won't count towards your replacement trees. So we'll get a little bit more on top of that.
Street trees do not count.
Not towards your replacement because they're already required.
Is that, I mean.
Yeah, Pauline, can we have that discussion?
We can, Morgan. We blew past the public comment part, so we need to pause for that. Kathy has her hand up, so did Christy. Kathy and Christy, can you hold until public comment, or do you want to? If it's time sensitive, we're happy to hear.
No, I'll hold.
Thank you very much. Okay, great. So we do have a public comment because we've been talking about some options, and we last meeting did not. So we want to have a moment for anyone hoping to comment. We'd like to keep it to 3 minutes. And we can recognize online as well as in-person comments, please.
We had an in-person request here to speak from John.
Yeah, he already left. He sent me a note.
Okay.
Yeah. He had only brought up the idea because he has not been a participant in any of this, of the in lieu opportunity of allowing trees to be planted off-site and be counted. So I think that that's what his comments seem to be directed towards.
Which is definitely part of our
sidebar or discussion.
Yeah,
I shared with him that
very good.
We were going along that route.
Thank you. Are there any other?
I've not seen any tools online currently who have their hand raised.
Okay.
So if you are online, here's if you'd like to raise your hand to provide public comment, please do so.
Is everyone okay for now? Okay. Well, thank you. We'll obviously have future comment opportunities. So thank you. Thanks for summarizing, Jen. Okay, let's go to Kathy for her comment on the topics of the day.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm sorry, I've got a bad cold and you don't want me there. So thank you for allowing me to speak. I wanted to thank the council for echoing my repeated plea for flexibility. So thank you so much. Pauline, could you put up the screen for the saving percentage of DBH? I'd like to hear from the developers in the room, but to me, it seems that this aspect of DBH creates the greatest amount of flexibility. And so I was just going to put my vote for this aspect because I think some of the arborists have pointed out that not necessarily the largest trees are the best trees to save. But if you do include the DBH, there is an incentive to keep some of the larger trees and not just immediately go to the smaller trees. So I like this and I like it at 30%, but I'd be okay with 25% to start with and see how it goes. But to me, I feel as an architect that the DBH provides the greatest amount of flexibility. And I just wanted to put that out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Appreciate that. Pauline, did you have any more slides to discuss with the group?
Not really.
Okay.
Just that I think what we're doing is trying to get direction on the percent of priority trees to be preserved and a percent on the DBH to be preserved. And it looks like we should talk about whether or not street trees can count towards replacement. We can have that conversation. I do have a slide on the replacement ratios. And I haven't done any math on that to see if all the street trees would count as the replacement, because then I'm not really gaining anything. But first, it would be great if we could.
Should we do it? Let's go around the room and talk about the flow chart order. Our goal would be, if we agree with the flow chart, let's make sure that the sort of priorities are in the right order. It's where it's either ascending difficulty or descending priority, so that we're getting the large trees first and then on-site trees and then replacement on site, hopefully in that order in most normal cases, so that we do accomplish the goal. And then further color commentary around the overall discussion for the day is fine. Karen, would you like to go ahead and start?
And calculating formulas is easy to provide more incentive for the larger trees. Say, for example, you take anything that's 20 inch DBH or above, you just give it an extra 100 inches. And so when you calculate it in percentage, you can meet your percentage easier, because the larger trees are going to be counted as a larger DBH than they actually are. You can skew the formula any way you want.
I just said that Morgan doesn't.
Would it be okay, just so we don't miss out, hear Morgan's comments, and then we'll go to Eric. Okay, Morgan, you are up.
Thank you, Jeff. Hey, I'm sorry, real quick, before I launch into my spiel, is Councilor Perkins still in the room?
Yes.
Hey, Councilor Perkins, can you please remind me, I'm sorry if it was in the room, when you were recapping the guidance from council after our check-in, did council weigh in on the necessity to prioritize the priority trees, or how did you guys land in terms of the juxtaposition between priority trees?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically this flow chart. We landed on, priority trees first, then smaller trees, then replacement on site, then mitigation.
Got it. Thank you very much. Yeah, so I think what I'd like us to focus on is that frequently, I mean, as has been expressed by the developers in the room, who certainly, every piece of property is going to be different. And so I think that it's really important for us to recognize that the city standards and engineering department in particular limit the flexibility of a developer's ability to reorient a development to keep anything, frankly. I think that it's really important that we exempt trees that are in the right of way, that are in the public utility easements, because frequently, and again, developers in the room, correct me if I'm wrong, but from my observation, the engineering department doesn't give a lot of latitude in terms of where sewer and water lines need to be. So after those exemptions have rightfully been made, if we focus on the percentage of priority trees that we determine, and it sounds like right now we're looking at 20, if that total DBH of those 20% priority trees cannot be met, then it seems reasonable that the balance of DBH can be made up with other trees on site. That feels like a reasonable option that achieves the goal of total DBH of priority trees on site. About a month ago, I tried to articulate this in the room and became completely undone. So I'm going to pause there. Jeff, does that make sense to you? Did you understand anything that I just said?
I think so. What I'm hearing you say is what I believe we're conceiving with the second option on the flow chart, which is if you can't save the percentage of priority trees, which we know is at least 20 inches, then you would move to total DBH percentage preserved on site. And that would be a mix of any of the existing mapped trees. So it'd be 6 inches and larger, but you get there faster by using larger trees. So that option by itself has a built-in incentive to get to the DBH percentage by using the larger trees where possible.
Correct. Got it. Okay. That's perfect. Thank you. And then finally, I think as Corey noted, I think that was Corey in the room, because the street tree standard is pretty rigorous. I think is it every 30 feet, every 25 feet? That does end up with a greater number of trees being planted on site than were removed in almost every instance. And so again, if part of the direction is to increase the urban tree canopy, that is achieved with the standard that's in the code currently. So it seems reasonable that developers would get credit for not only doing the required street, mitigating to the extent that they can with additional tree plantings on site.
Okay, noted. Any questions for Morgan? Chrissy.
I have an overall question. I think if we do get into the street tree talk, and that's something we want to include for mitigation, the question of what's the incentive to not clear cut because we know we're already budgeted to put these street trees in comes into play. So I think you'd have to discuss kind of how we keep the first priority there.
Okay.
If the site's already kind of planned to have those street trees.
And Chris isn't here, but I can hear him talking about the species of the tree.
Yeah.
A maple on the street versus a ponderosa that got cut down is probably something to talk about. But every site is complicated.
And I would recommend that if this committee is interested in not counting any of the trees in any of the right of way, I'd like to redo these numbers to see what that even looks like. I mean, I think these will drop significantly if we don't count any of the trees in any proposed right of way or utility easements, because that is, you're talking about 60 to 80 feet of everything.
So,
That just eliminates a number of trees.
All right.
When you say drops, it means more and more of these will meet even 30%, all of them is.
Yeah, because your number of trees that you're trying to save significantly it will be way less.
Yeah, that's my concern because I think they're so interconnected that changing that, I think the percent, like this whole conversation is based on determining that first, I think.
Okay, so, and specifically, Morgan, I just want to clarify, you're talking about all existing or proposed rights of way and utility easements, not just the Southeast Area Plan designation of collector and arterial.
I mean, unless a developer in the room has had a different experience that there's considerably more flexibility than I have observed.
Yeah, you're required to have block standards on all your roads, so you don't have a lot of option for your roads you're gonna put or be put, so.
That's a perfect segue into your opportunity to give us more thoughts. If you don't mind, Eric, let's move to you.
I think as far as that flow chart, I think that's great to, starting with the large trees, and if you can hit that, you don't have to worry about the rest of the items on the flow chart. That's the way we're dealing with this. I think that when we get into the counting and the adding up DVHs, we're gonna be going back and forth with staff for months on those kind of things. I can see that happening if we actually get to that point. So I'm hopeful we can just hit the big trees. I also have, with small properties, put an 8 townhome project in the backyard of somebody's house off of Pettigrew, where they got big lots. And there's one big tree in the backyard. What do you do about that one?
And that I think will come into.
Is it under an acre?
It's about an acre.
Okay. So it's right. at
All
the
those
cusp.
lots at Reed Market, Daily Estates, Pettigrew,
Yeah.
all those are gonna probably have houses in the backyard that are duplex.
Yeah.
And a lot of them have some big tree back there. Or two trees.
Got it. Got it. And so it's townhomes that trigger it, not those lot size.
I think
That
in
might be too technical, sorry.
townhomes is, and I see townhomes being done just to be able to exceed the density requirements, is why people do townhomes. But I don't know that it would matter for lot size if you're gonna put single family in something like that too, put a little private street back in the backyard of one of those properties. You're gonna impact any tree that is back there.
When that's the idea, that once we get to, and keep in mind when we talk about the floor, you know, we don't want a developer just go straight to clear cut and pay. Incentivize keeping the trees. So maybe, you know, you have the 5% floor, you at least have to preserve at 5%, which I have slides that show what 5% looks like on all these. It's very, very little. But maybe some of these smaller properties, Eric, I mean, 5% isn't practical. So when we talk about that floor, maybe we just say if you're 2 acres or less, you can go straight to mitigation, or an acre or less. Because those are tougher sites. And they're a lot of our infill.
Yeah, if it's
Right, that's
fairly narrow
infill.
and deep, there's only so much you can plant, you know, in the front to mitigate.
So they could just go to mitigation.
Right.
So if you were to pick a percent on the larger trees. what would be?
As low as you could go on any of these percents is my. that's-
20%.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, thank you. I see a raised hand from Kathy, which could be clarifying to our conversation here.
Oh, I just want to second what Pauline is saying in terms of accepting the smaller size, at least for an acre. I do actually a lot of that size. And typically we're able to keep the perimeter trees, but because of fire access and turnaround and all that kind of stuff, it's really hard to save anything that's in the middle of the site. And so if we're trying to encourage as much housing as possible, I think we want to limit the amount of impact that we're doing on these smaller lots, because financially they're really hard to pull off at any rate. So I second the idea of the discussion of like exempting 2 acre and smaller sites or reducing the percentage for those. So I just wanted to weigh in on that.
Thank you very much. Eric, was that enough for you?
That's all I have.
Okay, great. Let's go to Corey.
I think my thoughts are fairly well aligned with what everybody's said so far, especially Morgan. And with the exception of the whether we include the streets or not, for me, I feel like you would have to look at those calculation differences before you look at percentages. So for the sake of suggesting a percentage, I'll just assume that we're going to do it how we've been doing it now, and say that the right way to say that, but we're not subtracting the trees from the streets or whatever. And I would agree, if the goal here is to start saving more trees than we are now, I would start with the smaller percentage, because that does incentivize more people to do that because it's more attainable. And so I would vote for the 20% as well. I like the process that we're going down with, you know, trying to save the big trees or the DBH. I don't really have an opinion on it, honestly, either way on that. I think every site's unique. And in terms of the street trees and, you know, tree to tree ratio, I don't know if we want to get into the, like, how many 2 to 1 yet, or just.
We will have that discussion. I mean, you're welcome to share now, but we will have a discussion on the replacement ratios specifically.
Okay. Yeah, I'll make a general comment. I think, you know, the goal here is that we don't have a, you know, community filled with neighborhoods that are just paved and roofs, right? Or we want canopy and we want to preserve trees. And so to me, a tree is a tree, whether it was planned or not. In terms of, you know, should street trees be counted? Absolutely. I don't think it matters whether that was budgeted or not. I mean, if we're saying, I think that if we're saying, well, it was budgeted for, so should we add another one? We're just saying we should just add more money and cost to building homes then. And so I know it wasn't what you were intending to say, but it's kind of how that
Well, and
came
the
across.
question would be, I guess, like, what would keep someone from just going straight to mitigation in that case, if they know they're gonna put those street trees in?
Because they're required.
Yeah. Right. Because then you lose all the other steps because you're putting the street trees in.
Yeah.
So I guess, like, how do we keep all those other steps in there?
Yeah, so I think that, I mean, my suggestion on that, somewhere in between maybe, would be that it's like evergreen and deciduous, right? So if you're taking down an evergreen, you can't replace it with a deciduous street tree. But if you're taking down a deciduous tree, then you can replace it with a deciduous street tree or something along those lines, so somewhere in the middle. And
Is that because the street trees are often deciduous?
You're not even allowed to put a ponderosa in as a street tree, right? Somebody told me that and I was like, are you kidding me? That's the most iconic tree of our community, but I'm pretty sure it's not in the standards.
I've
Eric,
seen it.
I don't know.
It's in Washington, it's in front of my house.
Yeah.
I think you can.
From my house.
Yeah,
Was
you
it
can.
newly planted though, or was it pre-existing?
It is newly planted and I don't think it is. Okay. I don't know, it's Northwest Crossing, so I think they just have a different streetscape
that's
across.
different.
But if you drive down Mount Washington, that's what but you need, and I've talked to a lot of arborists about, and this is sidetrack, but about allowing condos in as a street tree. You just need a much wider planter width of 10 feet or more.
Yeah, that's
And
right.
then the.
So in my neighborhood, it's a 24-inch. And the city came along maybe 5 years ago off Hardy and put it's a Hardy extension, put a median 10-foot wide. It's doing great. I was amazed.
Yeah, I would encourage that. But I do think street trees should count for something. I mean, that when you drive through neighborhoods, they make our neighborhoods beautiful. And they provide a lot of canopy and so to me, they absolutely should count for something.
Okay, noted. I was gonna ask so I hear you on 20% of priority trees. Then maybe how do you feel about the idea of a larger percentage of whether it's DB, like when you're looking at all trees, if you can't do just the large trees, have that be a larger percentage to hopefully push the priority to that first step?
Oh, I see.
That
what
makes
you're saying.
sense. So if it's
Yeah.
like 20%, then 25% of total DBH would be your alternative so that there's a natural.
Yeah.
Put you on the spot. Let's think about that. There's the sound, everybody.
2 minutes early.
Okay, I think you just wipe it out. Very close.
It's not? Or maybe it was coming from the
Sound.
side.
Oh, the sound was turned off on mine.
Why am I feeling that?
Okay.
That's what I meant.
I was there. I was like, I'm gonna pass.
All right, but let's come back in 5 minutes, everybody regroup. We're gonna pause for 5 minutes. Okay. Let's move over to Gina
Yeah.
for percentages, feedback, and et cetera.
Yeah, on the 20-inch or larger, I agree with what Pauline said. I think the lower percentage is probably better because that would incentivize saving those larger trees. And then definitely go with the DBH, not count. And there I would favor a higher percentage, 25 to 30, something in that range. And then, you know, the popular development is one of my projects. And the only reason we got to save even one of the 20-inch and larger was because it was literally on the corner, like on the edge of the site, near the right of way. And so we had to have other stuff in that area. We couldn't have put a house there. So it that's the only reason we got to save it. If it had been in the middle of the site, it wouldn't have been able to be saved. So I would advocate for flexibility for for smaller size properties. And maybe it's, I would just advocate for flexibility. And to add a parking lot item, there are no, Eric and I just looked up, there are no conifer trees allowed to be planted in the right of way. They are not allowed to be used as street trees. And, you know, I think one of the reasons this committee was even created is because people are sad about losing the iconic ponderosas and other conifers in the area. And so let's please add that to the parking lot.
Noted.
Yeah.
And I am updating the street tree list as part of this project. So I've been sending Chris and Brad been helping with the street tree list, and we have some in-house staff as well that have been routing it to nursery owners and other arborists to get feedback on wet street trees. And that's where my Pondo question keeps coming up. Can we look at Pondos? And I've gotten some positive feedback on those. So
awesome. Thank you.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
It's interesting because street trees have traditionally sort of been like, it needs to be such a caliper either at planting or at bond release. And then when you start blending deciduous with coniferous, like you could have a pretty good DBH Pondo that's about this tall and doesn't do anything for the street except block view, potentially grow wide. So it's like, there's potentially a mess there, but now we know that it's not even allowed.
Right.
So like we could at least look at that.
We could, yeah.
And I'm sure that there will be some sort of a caliper or DBH reference that says one versus the other.
the deciduous goes by caliber and the coniferous goes by height.
That's right.
And it's 5 to
Yes.
6 feet,
Yes.
depending on which code you're looking at.
Thank you. It took me
And street
5.5
trees aren't
minutes.
bonded, I don't think, that you.
Sorry,
put
that
them
was
in
other
with the house.
municipalities, right? Yeah.
So when you have a single developer project, then they are all maybe the same species, but when you have a project where you've sold lots to individual builders, those may be all different kinds of species of street trees through the neighborhood.
It's true. I have mountain ash and most of my neighbors have maples because I wanted something different. So yeah, there you go. Good point. Anything else, Gina? Thank you.
That's all.
Okay, cool. Christy.
Yeah, I would mirror those numbers. So with the 20-inch or larger, the lower percent to incentivize that option to the 20%. I think so we're going with, and then using the DBH versus the count option, and then the higher threshold that we have listed for the DBH, which I think is 30%. And then agree about exemptions for the smaller infill lots. Have a lot of thoughts about mitigation that I'll put on pause for now. And then with the caveat being, we don't know what we're doing with the right of ways and these other exceptions yet. So as currently proposed.
So that's the asterisk on these percentages is, you know, and what I want to make sure I wrote it down right. What I heard Corey say was, we're already we have some inertia that we're moving forward on this with the underlying right of way assumptions. And that's the reason for the percentage votes that we're getting so far, is we have this expectation of what the underlying standards will be. Something to think about as a group would be whether or not the right of way standards, the flexibility, other recommendations that we want to see, whether that would be tied to some further discussion of exemptions or not in an update. So just think about that. So that, because we have to put work product out there sooner rather than later.
So sorry, I feel like I misunderstood that.
Why?
Yeah,
It's so
well,
clear.
what are the right-of-way assumptions that we're using?
So as currently written in the code, where it
Okay.
would be only perimeter, then we would have to discuss whether we say, okay, we're gonna mirror the southeast area plan, which would be the internal arterials and collectors. But that potentially throws the wrench into the percentage discussion.
Right.
So the percentages that Pauline has been working under assume the current city of Bend, not the southeast area plan right of way.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
I think not just our trails and collectors, all the streets that are going in. I think that should be something we should think about.
Okay.
But I think what Kristen's saying, if we are going to think about that, then her percentages will probably go up.
Okay.
So that, then I would, if we were to go down that route, and there's interest, then I would like to come back at another meeting and look at these percentages differently, because right now we've been focusing on right of way being included, and I think that's why we've seen the percentages drop compared to like Portland's examples that we originally started with. But that'd be my recommendation.
All right, so Covey.
I just want to start with a question, and also Pauline, if we can bring the flow chart up again.
Yeah, I
If-
have to
okay.
rejoin the meeting.
Okay, take your time. I'll just ask the question first. So I do have the flow chart just so everyone can see it too. Looking at council's scope, the point number 3 was consider preservation standards for larger trees similar to the southeast area plan. And so I think I'm still a little confused. I think there is that right of way discussion that I think does because it changes all the numbers. But if we are looking at a similar right of way as a southeast area plan or consideration for right of ways as southeast area plan, I would definitely want us to follow the 50% for that case. But otherwise, so currently the numbers that Pauline has pulled is similar, I think you mentioned, Jeff, to the rest of the city code.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's based on that.
And then,
Oh, sorry, but also lowering the count to 6 inches where it was available. That data is not available in every application because we're the ones who recommended moving it to all 6-inch trees to increase the total number of trees that get counted.
yeah, and I think I made the point before that I think it goes both ways when we're doing that.
Adds
So,
flexibility. It adds
yeah,
trees to the denominator, deviates to the denominator, but also makes those trees eligible for option 2 under the draft that we're talking about.
exactly. Yeah.
Okay. I just want to make sure I had absorbed
Yeah,
your.
and same with the
feedback clearly.
24 to 20 inch change or.
Right, that was the other point I was gonna make was the 24 inches and 50% and excluding the right of way is all those three legs of the stool for the information from the Southeast area plan. So it is a bit, it's a bit of a wrench, but it's not impossible. It's just we've started to move down the path with the rest of the city as the assumption. Okay, sorry to interrupt you.
No, that's okay. That's helpful. And I think the other part I was just gonna make for the flow chart is I know the flow chart has like preserve priority trees. If you don't do that, do this. If you can't do this, then do this. And I think we're trying to go through one by one, but I also just want to point out that because they're all interconnected, that if we made a percentage higher, but we made this easier, or if we made this lower, but we made this higher, like I feel like they're all.
They are, absolutely.
Like we're trying to decide one after the other, but I do think they're all. So how I determine the percentage would affect the ratio, and it would affect the fee in lieu. So I just want to make sure that's at least on my mind that it's not just a linear decision-making process. It's kind of keeping all those pieces.
I think after we started talking about the DVH numbers, 24 to 20 and 10 and 6, I think we all came to that realization that it's really hard to make a firm. That's why we say recommendations, we haven't rendered any decisions because we think we get to a decision like, oh yeah, but if the next thing we talk about makes this harder or easier or waters down what we're trying to do, then that is a challenge potentially. So yeah, so your feedback on any and all of these, it's just we haven't talked about ratio options or recommendations yet, but we have a slide on that to talk about shortly after we get through the preliminary, what are you thinking as of right now on the percentages?
I think maybe one more question I have before I can provide my comment is for a Southeast area plan, there's a 50% and it has a different right of way consideration, but what are the next steps for that? If they can't meet 50%.
No alternative there.
I'm in the southeast area.
Mitigate.
The 50% drops to a lower percent, but they have to go through showing that they can't meet the minimum density and a couple other things before they can lower the percent requirement. But I don't think that they can ever just get out of it 100%.
So and then you get to if the minimum density can't be achieved, there's a couple other steps you go through.
But it's not the same kind of replace on site or fee in lieu options afterwards.
Oh, and this is not objective, I'd argue. So I don't know that we want to mirror that part of it.
Okay, that's helpful just for me, because I don't have an understanding of that, so that's helpful. So for percentages based on the numbers that Pauline has provided, I would go for the higher end of the 30%, and especially if you're doing anything differently with right of way considerations, then I would also go for closer to the Southeast area plan with 50%.
And are you, sorry, I was setting up, for the 30%, you're talking about the overall DBH.
I'm talking about the priority trees first,
Okay.
and then for the overall DBH, I'll go for 30% for that as well, if not higher. I just, yeah, I don't have enough. I think based on the numbers you provided, Pauline, I would go for 30%. If that changes, then I think I'd have to relook at it. And then the last two, I guess one more question I had for the acre size floor that there's been a little bit of discussion about. Would the options that are down on the flow chart help for those smaller lots in terms of replace on site or fee in lieu? Or are those also out of reach or would prohibit it, like have a large impact on the cost?
If we, the way I'm thinking about the floor, and I've seen this in other cities, so that's where we came up with this, but if it's, let's say 5% and they can't preserve the 5%, this would be a question for the committee, would they only mitigate on that 5% to keep the cost down on the replacement or in lieu fee versus on the higher amount?
Okay, and I think there's two floors we've talked about.
Yes.
One is the 5%. And then the other is just, I think we were talking about excluding super small lots of less than an acre or two.
Then they would probably have no.
They wouldn't need to do any of the other rest. Is that because those other steps are also too prohibitive for them? Is that why we would exclude those lots? Is my question.
Kind of. Yeah, that's, I guess, a question for the committee when we talk about the floor, and we can do that in the next meeting, so we're running out of time, but
yeah.
And I'll try and bring back some more information, ideas on the floor, I guess I should say, but I mean, if we're just gonna outright exempt all properties under a certain acre, that's one question.
Okay, and we can
Yeah.
table it for
And if we
there for
outright
now. And
accept
the
it,
last
we
thing
have
I'll
to-
say is, I'll just submit, is I'll also support, I think, Christie's idea or comment that basically we want to be careful that street trees that are already being planted or required by code is not used as a way to allow all trees to be cut. So I understand there. I think we'll have to have a discussion about how that would apply as part of the next part of this. And I'll yield my time. Thank you.
Noted. Good stuff. Thanks, Cody.
I like the flow chart. I think I'm with Jeff and Corey and Eric along the lines that the lower percentage is going to provide the best benefit, at least to start, and see how that flies, predicated on all these other assumptions that we've been working on. It also offers some flexibility and can be clear and objective. I'm not sure what that floor looks like. There's a lot of conversation about it. I feel strongly that Eric is correct in a presumption that a lot of the developments that are going to be happening within the UGB that are small scale, little guy stuff, little gal stuff are gonna be an acre or less, and they're not gonna pencil if they're gonna have to save trees. And that's the sort of housing that's critical for the future of the city, is stuff that's inside our UGB and close in. But again, I don't know how that really looks like. I don't know if it's just do it for housing only. I know on the Century mixed use property, I knew that property pretty well. That was their only choice. There was no way they could build anything there without cutting it all down. It makes sense. Conifer street trees is an interesting question. I think they happen organically in our neighborhood, in the West Hills. I think if you look at what people kind of plant on their own, you generally see trees that are planted. I get the iconicness of a pondo. They were all cut down. The entire west side was clear cut 70, 80 years ago. And they came back to some extent. We certainly have juniper in our neighborhood now because it invaded into that pondo. But if you look at what people plant, they plant deciduous trees. And the reason that they do it is it provides shade in the heat and provides light in the winter. And I'm reluctant to get prescriptive from the city down to developers or homeowners as to what they can plant and what should be planted. I worry that is can have a negative effect. So
I'll take a little different angle on street trees from you. And this is going back kind of what you said, Gina, which street trees have been required in Bend. And yet the council came and this committee was formed because the public was saying big trees are being cut down and street trees are being put in the place, right? And so you can probably, based on that comment, know where I stand on counting street trees, because street trees do not equal priority trees in the public's mind. And so having said that, I think Karen's comment about giving a bonus to priority trees in the formula makes a lot of sense. I'm in favor of DBH as opposed to just a simple count of trees for flexibility. I'm not going to weigh in on the percentages because I get to vote on that at some point on the committee. So planning commission. One question, this is for commercial lots as well, right? Okay, so when we're saying, the smaller, like I'm thinking of the property on the corner of Shevlin Park and, you know where I'm talking, Megan? I mean, that may have kicked off this whole thing.
Yes.
Because there were a number of condos along the perimeter, and now there are 6 little street trees. Yeah. And so there were a lot of trees on that property, and everyone expected the interior trees to go. But when you see trees along the roadway being cut and then street trees being put in, I mean, it hurts. And so I think, I don't know how large that property is. It's probably a couple acres. And I think that the regulations should apply on properties like that. So I'm not in favor of saying if you have 2 acre and less, you're exempt.
Where the new office buildings on North and Crossing.
The mass,
Yes.
is that mass timber building?
Yeah. Yeah. That's it for me.
Appreciate that, Sue. Thank you. Dan?
Well, it's an honor to go last. Listen to the great comments.
Oh, we do have Brett.
Oh, okay. So I won't be last. But anyway, it's always nice to go towards the end. Real comments. A lot of good input today. I think my focus is going to be on the idea of flexibility and simplicity. The idea of the 20% priority priority trees, 25% DBH. Makes a lot of sense. If you factor in simplicity, and you start factoring in canopy health and variety of trees, my real preference would just be to go with the 25% DBH. As a consultant, when you start looking at tree codes and you've got this choice or this choice and this choice, your head just starts spinning. And you gotta go take a coffee break, walk around and look at it again. So as a consultant, a 25% DBH is a good thing just to look at, make it work, see if it works, and then move forward. I think as the arborist had talked about, the 25% DBH really does great, more diverse tree, canopy, habitat, tree types, which we need rather than just the iconic ponderosas, which we all love. It's more of a visual focus. I mean, it's a visual focus. That's what everybody loves. I think the 25% DBH is a better environmental selection. Either one, I think either one of those, I think is a great choice. As far as the exemptions on small lots, definitely, because they're different, they always need flexibility and thoughts on that. As far as street trees, relative to other city codes, I probably worked with 30 codes around the state. I don't know of any that allow required trees, i.e. street trees, to be counted as mitigation trees. I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm just saying that's how other codes are written. And it's going to add a lot of complexity. You start mixing those two. It seems best just to keep the required trees, just the street trees, the required trees, the mitigation trees, and mitigation trees. It's just going to be easier to count and figure and design and move through the whole permitting process just to keep those separate. And then as far as street trees, I really would agree with tree diversity, the more different types of trees, evergreen, coniferous. The city of Eugene, you should look at them. They're driving me crazy right now with their street tree diversity because they've got all these different trees and it's really great, I think, in terms of sort of a new way to think about street trees and communities. So it just doesn't have this uniform appearance. It has a lot of complexity, it has a lot of canopy, it has a lot of color, and really provides a lot of different habitat also.
One the nice thing about street trees, I'm pulling that out of the Bend Development Code, so we can update it without going through the state or through planning commission and city council every time one tree doesn't work or it's diseased, or we come up with a new variety that we'd like to add to it, we can just do it. So be easier.
I realized I may have skipped Kathy because she gave such comprehensive thoughts. So Kathy, did you have further thoughts with this specific around the room?
Thank you. When you said you only had Brett left, I had to put my hand up. Sorry. Just that I would echo the issue of being simplified, easy to implement, and I prefer the DBH approach. If there's a consensus on 25%, I could support that. If we start to take out right-of-ways, I think we need to re-examine that, maybe a little bit higher. And I just wanted to mention that in a lot of the communities I work in, when we get to the mitigation portion, we often look at larger box specimens as counting more towards a mitigation. But when we get into the mitigation discussion, we can look at that. I think it's important to exempt 1 acre parcels and smaller. I would agree 2 acres has more flexibility and probably should still meet some requirements. So Pauline, when you come back at that base, I would think that, something larger than 1 acre should have some requirement. But I do think exempting 1 acre parcels will really help on the small mom and pop developers that are trying to do something on their own property. And I think, requiring too much on that smaller property could make the difference between whether it could go or not. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Kathy. Brett.
Yeah, hey, thank you. So I would like to say, I really support the use of the flow chart and the way that it's laid out. I think it's very comprehensive. And I would be supportive of the 30% for both categories. I would also like to make note that I don't feel as if street trees should be factored into the mitigation. I think that is a separate topic altogether, but really do want to repeat some of the other panelists' comments in regards to how important it is to have a very diverse street tree palette. I also would encourage us to start thinking about potential mitigation factors and maybe be prepared to have conversations in regard to any of the mitigation that we have in developments be earmarked towards the care and upkeep of our current street trees and canopy. That's it for me.
Brett, thank you. I would say that you probably can guess that I'm in favor of 20% for the priority tree and then a higher percentage at 25 for DPH. And I was thinking about what Dan was saying. You're sort of right that it may be that a certain swath of developers will start at the DBH.
Yeah, I mean, they could if they want, they could jump to that.
And just say, okay, well, this may actually give us more flexibility, which is part of the data collection that we would do anyway, because we'll be able to see which option ends up getting the most use and then adjust from there. I'm just a year from now, just super excited about having all these applications. I'm sorry, others have had a chance to dig into. And then,
so it's not prescriptive. You don't need to start at 20, go to 25. You can just jump to 25.
Right.
Or the DBH.
Yes, you wouldn't have to go in order. The flow chart represents our hope for priority based on the instructions of council. But if a developer's looking at, has a halfway decent understanding of these, then it's sort of going into, oh, well, this site has either a lot of trees or not a lot of trees, or, and that's where you sort of say, okay, well, let's just start here rather than necessarily investing in 5 different studies. Up front.
A question. Yeah, Eric. Now, what if, Pauline, what if you don't have any 20-inch trees on your site? What if there are none?
Then you would go to the DBH.
You would have to.
Oh, Morgan.
She did.
Morgan went. Yeah.
I'm not sure she gave percent.
Morgan, did you give percentages?
I did not, but yes, I agree. I also prefer the 20%.
And 20% for both priority trees and the regulated trees, or 20% for priority and something different for the overall DBH?
Yes, for both. And I'll just make a note, that's assuming the exemption of city requirements.
Jeff, I know we're short on time, but can I make a couple of general, just quick comments?
Yes, please.
So first off, one thing we haven't talked about in terms of incentivizing people or developers in this process would be maybe some type of credit if they were to meet the code, which would obviously be a big incentive, especially when you're trying to provide some affordable housing. So parking lot maybe discussion.
Okay.
And then the other thing is we refer a lot to the Southeast Area Plan, which I understand why, and that was obviously in the council goals, but I also think it's important to point out, I think that the reason why council, and correct me if I'm wrong, but points to that is because it was the first tree preservation code that was provided, and it's not proven to be a good code yet. It's just the first. And so I don't think we should be working to try to match that or do exactly as they do, because there's no proven theory that that's a good code.
Also very big parcels.
Yes.
That was something that we talked about at our work session, and I'm sorry if I didn't emphasize that enough, but yeah, let's broaden that and not assume that that's the standard, the gold standard here.
All right, good stuff. What's next? I want to stay on target here.
I would like to have direction on what percent we are using for priority trees in the vote.
Yeah, okay, so let's do a show of hands at 20% for priority trees.
How about online?
Online,
Seeing you online.
are you able to see who's got hands raised? 2 participants raised hands.
That's
Okay.
8.
Yeah, okay, and then let's do a show of hands at 25% for priority trees. And then 30% for priority trees.
Could we, there's so many good ideas presented, could we like write them all down? Because there've been caveats to so many of them. Like 20% seems kind of low, but then you look at the lot size, there's so many variables, and I think it'd be useful, like 20%, okay, and what would the criteria be? 30%, would the criteria be different? In other words, we talk about including or not including the right of way. That really could change the percentage that optimally you would want.
So the vote right now would be that we're just talking about the 20 inches or larger, and it would be with the right of way included, because that's the assumptions we've been making this entire time. If there was consensus to take out the right of way, I would request that we relook at the data and start.
Start over.
Yeah. So when you're voting, Karen, it would be just a 20%, 25%, or 30% of 20 inches or larger for the trees. And so I have 8 at 20%, no one's supporting 25%, and 3 at 30% currently.
Ask a quick line.
Yeah, I think Brett was.
Yeah,
at 30.
so that's the
Yeah, I think Brett, it was Brett.
I'm at 30%.
But for example, if you say 30%, and you could help that along, but it being less restrictive, by saying, okay, every 20 inches is gonna get another 50 inches. And so if we're gonna go with 30%, every 20 inches would really be counted as 70 inches.
So this is just on the 20% or larger. The
Okay.
next,
Because,
the next,
you know,
yes, the
yeah,
next
the
number I'll ask
numbers and the
for
details, yeah.
is the DVH part.
Yeah, I
At
got
which
it.
point that is, that's where I think your recommendation could have some bearing.
Well, I'm gonna vote 30% with lots of caveats.
Okay.
Okay, so on the priority trees, 30%, I have Christy, Cobby, Karen, and Brett, 4.
That's what I think.
Could I ask a quick clarifying question?
Of course.
So just to make sure I understood, we've been calling it a flow chart, but I think at least my understanding is there are basically 4 options. Anytime their development is going up, they have 4 options,
But you have to start with option 1.
but it doesn't matter, right? Because they can go right to the last
I
option.
mean, they
if they
won't
wanted to.
have to prove to us that those prior options didn't work.
Yeah.
Exactly.
We're
So
trying
I
to
mean,
set
in
up the
fact,
code so
by
it's
code,
lucrative
there's 4
to go.
options to consider. And so we're saying
Yeah.
priority comes first, but they
But,
could go right
right.
to DPH.
Yeah.
They could go directly to
Right.
B. and let- I just wanna
Exactly.
make
So
sure
we're
that's
trying to
clear.
create a clear and objective set of options.
And-
that results in a flow chart that moves like
Yes.
this, right?
Yes.
Because
There's
otherwise.
no- there's nothing
Provide some-
incentivizing.
and provide some carrots to be at
Yes.
the beginning.
So we can still maybe come up with some carrots. Okay.
Absolutely.
That's one thing I want to note. And then the other thing is there's, looking at the example of priority trees, there's 8 developments listed there. 3 of them or 4 of them already meet the 30% criteria. As these are development before the code is even there, already meet it.
Right.
And even if the 30% was passed, the ones that don't meet it, they only have to, they can still go to DBH and see if they meet it, which I think one of them does,
Right.
or 2 of them, one of them does. And if they don't meet the DBH, then they just have to replace that many trees on site.
Or paying them.
Yeah, but basically if we
True.
don't, like, even if it's 30% and it's,
Yes, so they happened to preserve those, but under today's code, they didn't have to do any of that.
but they're already
They had to
doing
map
that.
it. They did, yes, it happened,
Yeah.
but that could be, as a builder, I would say that is very much site dependent. So.
But we're trying to incentivize more of this than what
Correct.
currently happens.
Not
I'm saying it's
less.
already happening. And then they still have options even if they don't meet 30%. So I feel like 20% from just like looking at all the options that are there just feels like very low. I just wanted to at least put that out there, making sure I'm understanding that correctly, because they still have other options, even if they don't meet the 30%.
Right.
One of those, the big one, Caraway, it happens to be where there's not really housing in the first phase. So it's not really a good example.
Right.
So.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think people's answers could change based on where the
Yeah,
carrots come
this isn't the
from.
final, just like the
This is-
6
yeah.
and 10 or the 24 versus 20, like, we're trying to glue together a loose idea of what it could look like, because we have to evaluate the whole thing. Otherwise, these individual decisions will have mismatches on how they flow.
And that's where the details will come.
Yeah.
You'll eventually see a full draft code to comment on too, but we're trying to get chunks of the code.
Yeah, to get the rocks in the jar.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so, let's go to the DBH conversation now. So I think we had consensus that the DBH gives more flexibility than the count of trees, but that was a good detour. Thank you. That was useful. Let's show of hands at 20% for percentage DBH.
This is the second step in, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Two online.
And then 2 online.
Okay, so 3 total.
Yes.
I'm not sure Brett realizes his hand was still up from before, so I just want to say, Brett, did you mean to do 20%?
So I'm gonna say 2.
Negative. It's not showing my hand raised on my end. I'm 30%.
Okay, okay, so
It was
Morgan and
Morgan.
Kathy are the two.
Morgan and Eric.
No, not me.
Okay, thank you. 25% total DBH.
For mine.
Can I switch over to that 25?
It may not make a difference there. I think Morgan wanted to too.
Always want to bet on a winner, right?
All right, so I switched Eric.
Okay, and then 30% total DBH.
30%, if we double count the 20. Every 20 inch counts 40.
Noted.
I'll do,
Yes or no?
I'll do 30 or higher.
Okay, so that's 1, 2, 3,
30 or higher,
4,
okay.
5, and 2 online.
Greater than or equal to 30%. All.
I'll say 40, but I'll go for 30.
Well, now I have to. Yeah, that's right.
Yep.
12.
Woo!
Math works.
It
So
does.
then
Thank you, sir.
the recommendation in this is the priority trees at 20% and overall DBH is at 30%. So the incentive is to first save the priority trees. There'll be a much smaller number. If you can't, then the DBH will be 30%. And those can include the priority trees.
Damn.
Are you switching your vote?
Well, the math is hard to understand, but it seems like there's such a big difference between the two. It may be difficult to make it a progression. It seems like they should be closer. You know, in fact, Jeff, you said 20 and 25. It seems like it should be 20 and 25 or 25 and 30 to make sure the decision process flows smoothly, rather than having too big of a jump between 20% and 30%. Does that make sense?
Or you think it would be easier, like less,
I think if it's, yeah,
work
it's
in
less
this setting, but too
flexibility.
different.
Yeah, those seem too far apart to give flexibility. They too disparate in a way.
kind of where you were saying, just have one, just do 25% DBH.
Or if you're gonna go with both of them, it feels like the percentages should be closer. You know, if I had to vote, I'd say 25 and 30. Well, yeah, well, 25 and 30 or 20 and 25, one of those
Closer together.
those closer
Okay.
together, the way you move from one to the other, I think will make it,
So you're saying in the process of doing your job,
Yeah.
of doing the work.
well, also on the site too, I think for developers and even for tree preservation, it may be hard to make, it may be hard to meet 30. And then so everyone would,
So going back to the flow chart, maybe a simpler way to do it would be preserve a percent of all trees. And those trees that are 20 inches and larger get like a bonus. kind of. They get counted twice or something like that.
And that sounds confusing. to me
Yeah,
too, right?
Does it?
Yeah.
Yeah, bonuses and double counting.
That's what Karen was
Yeah.
suggesting, I think, right?
Right.
Karen was kind of suggesting, if you're saving, if you're doing a percentage of trees that you're saving and.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's just a way to, I mean, Dan was saying to have two different thresholds is kind of confusing. And so if we have one threshold, but we give a little boost, you know, to the priority trees, and we're kind of meeting council's objective, which is to preserve priority trees. Anyway.
I think the way that 20% works is it's such a small number that that's the incentive to meet council's goal, the larger
Right.
trees. But then 25 or 30 on the DVH is
Yeah.
the question. I mean, DVH is 30%, 7 people voted for that, 4 people voted for 25%, and 1 person voted for 20.
Yeah, I think it's fine.
I guess something for everybody to take home would be, you know, we've talked all along about wanting to incentivize the larger trees. So on the one hand, a bigger gap probably pushes people there, but in reality, if you simply can't meet the 20% because roads, utilities, rules we can't control yet, then 30% could be a pretty onerous difference from one to the other.
Right.
At which point we get into a little bit of a needed housing,
Yeah,
you know, wrinkle.
yeah.
I'm concerned to find a whole lot that has no 20-inch trees. It's nothing but junipers that are 8 to 12 inches. And you're stuck, we're trying to save 30% of those. And this is like an industrial zone or something. You're in that position. I can see that happening. So.
I'm not advocating for a lower or higher. My point is that the 10% jump seems like a big jump between the two.
This is why we get the big fat committee checks.
Helicopters.
Because we have to sweat our way through these. So, we put some votes together today to give Pauline something to chew on for the next meeting, and our meeting's in 2 weeks. So we're gonna have some.
I mean, we could revote on the 2025,
Okay.
see after, since we just. had
So
that
we've just had a little
discussion.
discussion. Do we want to talk about the DBH percentage again? And I'd be fine going around the room again. Kathy has a raised hand. Let's hear that, and then Covey.
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation you're having, and I could support 25% or 30%. I think it's something that I'd want to look at again if we did decide to take out arterials and collectors. But I could go with either 25% or 30%. I just wanted to put that out.
I would say let's go quickly with the around the room again with the underlying assumption we're not changing the right of way calculation. We're not changing the street tree calculation just because for the purpose of this, that's what all these numbers are based on. And that's to just go around and say, you know, 20, 25% or 30% of DBH.
Yeah.
Kathy, will we say 25 for you?
Yeah, you can say 25 for me.
Brett? Did we lose Brett? Brett was 30 before. Brett, if we don't hear from you, we'll say 30 for you. Karen?
So we're going to exclude the right of way for collectors and arterials.
Correct.
Or this is included in the.
It's including all the right of way.
Included as an
Okay,
option.
Just how we do it
the
today.
whole property.
Yep.
Yeah. As it currently reads in the code.
I lower the percentage, 25.
Okay. Eric,
25.
Corey, Gina. Say it once more with,
30.
there you go. Christie.
Probably say it.
30.
I don't understand why we're doing another round of this, because I still see them as 4 different options, and I don't understand why we need to keep them closer together, if there is an incentive for priority trees. If anything, I'll just want to share this real quick. I did the math. There on the 8 properties or developments. There's 136 priority trees on the 8 developments. Currently, 33 priority trees were preserved for those 8 developments. With the code we're doing, the minimum preservation is 24, so it's actually less. Even with the change to 20%, it would save 7 more trees. So I just want to share that math of, are we going to accomplish what we're trying to accomplish with this code? Is still something I'm debating with. So I would say 30%, but yeah, I'm still not satisfied with the 20% for the priority trees because I don't know if we'll accomplish saving any more trees.
Okay, noted.
I'll drop to 25 from 30. Yeah, 20, 25.
Okay, yeah, we were talking specifically about DBH.
Yeah,
as the-
DBH,
as the
drop down to
second part of the
25.
flow chart.
That's
Okay.
fine. I originally said 30.
Sue's not voting.
So we're voting on DBH.
So we were talking about DBH, yeah.
Okay.
Now I want to change my vote on the priority tree.
So priority
I know, I
definitely
do
on
too.
20, 'cause that was a significant difference. That was 8 people voted for the priority at 20 and 4 people were at 30. No one was at 25%.
It's all good at 30.
Well, okay, you're going to 30 on DBH. Okay.
Okay.
On
No,
priority.
no, on priority. I think I was already at 30 on DBH. So now I'm 30 and 30.
30 and 30. 30 for 30.
I'd stay with my 30 on DBH, but I would change my priority to 25.
Oh, Morgan wasn't there.
Morgan, are you still on?
I am, yes.
20 and 20?
Yeah, we're just revoting on DBH, correct?
Yeah, but it's sort of blowing up into both.
Yeah, I think that I'm gonna stick with 20 and 20, but I'm afraid that I do have to jump off from here. Time do you have, Jeff?
Okay, we'll do this together.
Mr. Dillon was wondering what the cost of
Hey, I'm going to jump in real quick if I can. I'm at 30 and 30 still.
Okay, okay, no. Pauline will take this through and have an update for us as a group, because I'm not sure I can say
So I
back
think
to
we're still
everybody where we are.
priority trees.
We're still at 20.
Is still at 20, and then I would say that the DVH went to 25%.
So we'll keep the data where it is, visible for future meetings, but the conversations, what we're trying to do is say, okay, what are we mapping? What's priority? What's preservation for priority? What's the preservation for DBH, so that we can get into mitigation at the next meeting?
Can I just ask a quick question? Would it be possible to just get some numbers based on what the group has decided to see how that would change based on the development numbers you already have? To see how many stairs would be preserved? Based on the 20 and 25.
So that's what's up here. Is that different
I
numbers?
guess seeing how many extra trays are preserved based on this shows how many developments are meeting it. The 25% and 20% numbers. So kind of the numbers I shared real quick, but having that sort of group to at least see and reflect upon to see if that accomplishes what we're trying to accomplish.
So like you're talking about the incremental savings of priority trees. Yeah, with DBH, that's hard to do because you're only counting it's a total number as a percentage.
Is it fair to say another way, Covey, that you're concerned that we might be saving less trees with the numbers we're considering? Is that?
I get it.
Yeah.
So, do you want me to compare what was actually preserved with what the requirements are going to be?
Yeah,
amongst
because
all 8?
like I shared, I think
Okay.
our requirement is less than what is actually currently preserved.
Right.
So if the community is concerned about priority trees being cut down, we're still allowing this code is less than what is already happening. Is my concern.
What happened
in these
What happens in
yeah.
these examples, yeah.
Okay, I can do that for the DVH. I mean, priority trees is pretty strong at 20%, and I think the lower we keep that, that's more of an incentive to preserve the priority trees. And this, again, you know, we can change them, but I can bring back some information on the DVH, the differences between 25%, 20, 25, and 30.
Okay, I can talk to you after the meeting just to make sure.
Hey, thanks for everybody's extra time. Really appreciate it. Good discussions today. We'll see you soon.
Good meeting. Thank you.
Thanks.
2 weeks.
Have a sparkling day in Central Oregon.
Oh, I didn't-